If I consider operation, then I have to consider two parts. One is interface and another one is implementation. So here interface is nothing but that includes operation name and data types of its argument. Database comprises of n number of user and each user will going to think in a different perspective. Every content of a database at the same time should be available to more than one user. That is regarding what? Concurrency control software. Everybody, a warm welcome to one and all. Welcome back to the session 2 on unit 1 of B.C.A's 4th semester subject called Database Management System. In short, it will be called as DBMS. I'm Rohini TS, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. In the previous session of this unit, we had discussed regarding the definition of database. So, what do you mean by database? Database is what? It is a collection of logically related data that will going to allow us in order to access, manipulate and update the content to the database. That is what the definition of database. And also we had a discussion regarding DBMS. So, that is database management system. It is a software that will going to manage all the databases which is resides in it. That is what DBMS. And also we have learned some of the definition regarding what you mean by metadata, what is transaction, who is considered as end users. That and all we have discussed in the previous session. And also we have one example with respect to the university. So there I have taken some of the tables and each table comprises of rows and columns. So that row represents the data that what we are giving, that is also considered as what? Record. And also we have a column for a table. So that column represents the attribute of a table. That is what I have discussed as an example in my previous session. So in our today's session, we are going to learn about the characteristics of database. So, we will be learning regarding what are the characteristics we have with respect to the database, and also we are going to learn about who are all the actors on the scene. And also, I will be discussing regarding workers behind the scene, actors on the scene and workers behind the scene. What is this scene is all about and who will work in front of that scene and who is going to work behind that scene, everything that I am going to discuss in my today's session. So now we'll see regarding the characteristics of database. So as we all know that database is a collection of logically related data and each logical related data will going to be represented in the terms of table. Then what are the characteristics it comprises of? So here I have listed out the characteristics of database. So it includes self-describing nature of our database system. Already I have told you regarding the catalog, right? So for example, if you are purchasing any of the product, at the time along with the product they are going to give you one manual array catalog that represents what? How to use that product. That is also possible in the database. So we have a catalog, we have what? Dictionary, data dictionary that comprises of a complete details or complete structure of a database. That is what regarding self-describing nature of database systems. Second characteristic is what? Insulation between programs and data abstraction. So, if I am doing some changes, consider I have a building in that I have 4 floors, okay. So, if I am doing some changes or if we are renovating something regarding the first floor, that should not affect on the 4th floor. That is what? The data should be independent from one data to another data which is present in the database. That is what regarding insulation between the data and programs and data abstraction. Let me talk about this later. And also it supports the multiple views of a data. So you can take the example of what book my shows. So at the same time, most of the user will going to access the particular movie. That means they will check for the availability of a seat based on the date, based on the timings, based on the theater. That means what? Support of multiple views. More than one user will going to view the same data at a time. Even that is also possible in the database. And also we have sharing of data and multi-user transaction processing, booking over online or having a transaction system or online booking. All those comes under this category with respect to the last point. So we'll see the first point or a first characteristics of a database with respect to that self-describing nature of a database. Already we had discussed regarding the catalog. So that will going to store the complete or self description of a database. So what database comprises of, how many tables it has, and what is the characteristic or like what is the data type of that particular table. Everything will going to be stored in the catalog, and how many users we have, what kind of users we have, and what is the data structure we are using, what is the data type it includes, everything will going to be stored in the catalog. So that is also considered as what? Metadata. Data about another data is called metadata. In the same way, database is also has the ability to describe itself. That is what we are going to call that as a self-describing nature. Okay, so here database system contains complete definition of structure and constraint. So what database comprises of? So that database has a catalog, and that catalog will going to comprises of a complete definition. How many database I have, how many tables I have, what is the data type of each table, and how many rows, columns, everything, all the definition of a table or a complete definition of that database will going to be stored along with a constraint. That means its rules and regulation. For example, if I wanted to allow any student which is below the age of 18, then the constraint must be age should not be greater than 18. So if it is satisfying that rules and regulation, then only I must able to allow that data to be entered to the database. That is what constraint, rules and regulation that we are enforcing in order to improve the efficiency of a database. That is what the first thing. And I am going to call that kind of data as a metadata. Data about another data is called metadata. So here it will describe the structure of a database. Anyway, the database is also a structure. So if any other database is describing the structure of database, then we are going to call that as a metadata. So catalog is also going to do the same thing. So catalog is what? One structure that is describing the structure of database itself. And also database catalog is used by, then who are all going to use this database catalog, for what purpose they are using? So DBMS software. So in the DBMS software, we are going to use this database catalog because I wanted to get to know, for example, if I am building any of the software or if I am writing some of the code from in order to access the content of a database, then I must know what is the structure of database, what is the definition of that database, how many tables it comprises of, what are the operation I wanted to do. So based on that, DBMS software is going to use this database catalog, and database user who need information about the database structure. For example, if I wanted to get to know the structure of database, so that structure is nothing but what? How many number of tables we have, and what is the data type, and what is the constraints or rules and regulation that enforces on a particular table. So if I get to know, then being a user, I must be able to give that kind of records or that kind of data to my database. So for that reason, database users and DBMS software will going to use this database catalog, and that database catalog has a capacity to describe itself, that specify the database complete definition, structure, and also constrain what needs to be enforced. This is regarding what? First, characteristics of a database. So next, what we have, that is insulation between programs and data. So as I told, if I have a 4 floors of building, if I am doing some renovation with respect to first floor, that should not affect on the another floor. That is also regarding this insulation between program and data. So here we are going to deal with data independence and program independence. For example, you just take the consideration of a traditional file system. So in the traditional file system, if I wanted to access any of the file, or if I wanted to access the content of any of a file, then that is depends on the accessing method, that depends on the structure of a file. For example, if I change the structure of a file, that also affects on the program, then again that program needs to be changed. So if a structure of a file is changing, then the program needs to be changed in order to access that structure. But in the DBMS, if I change anything to the scheme of a database, or if I change anything to the database, that is not going to affect on a program. So program will be independent than the operations or a access processing. That is what the first point here. So the program data independence. So here it is not depends on one another. But if you take the example of traditional file system, in order to store the data and information in any of the file, at the time if I am changing a structure of a file, then I must also change the structure of a program in order to access that database. That is what you have to remember here. So that structure of a data files is stored in DBMS catalog separately from access program. So whatever we have in a database management system catalog, that if I am doing anything changes to that catalog or its complete structure or a definition, that will not going to affect on my access program. So user will not get to know what is the changes they are doing behind. That is what data and program independence. And also we have a program operation independence. So if you consider the operation is nothing but behavior or its methods. So operations are nothing but it is a set of instruction that we are performing some action. So here user can define the operation as a data on the database. So here operation specified in two parts. So if I consider the operation, as I told, it is nothing but methods. That means we are performing particular task in order to get the particular output. So here program and operation independence, in the sense we have to consider on the two parts. One is regarding interface and another one is regarding implementation. For example, you just imagine or you just take the example of WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, in the sense what, that is also one of the application or web application. So if I wanted to send some message to one person to another person, I am just going to type it on that, then I will press that right mark or I will press that the symbol. That means it will going to send. So here interface, in the sense what, how I am communicating, what is the screen behind one person to another user. That is what interface, whether it is graphical user interface or a character user interface. So nowadays we are only preferring on the graphical user interface because that is more interactive and more user friendly. So if I consider operation, then I have to consider two parts. One is interface and another one is implementation. So here interface is nothing but that includes operation name and data types of its argument. For example, if I consider my name as a operation and is equal to TSR, at that time this TSR is nothing but it's a parameter I am sending to this. So that includes operation name. What is the operation I am doing? I am performing what, naming. So and I am giving some value to that. That is considered as what? Its arguments or parameter. So as I taken the example of WhatsApp, at that time I wanted to send some text. Text are nothing but what? Arguments. To whom I wanted to send? That is what? Its operation name. So this interface include operation name along with its parameter. Then what about implementation? So can be changed without affecting the interface. For example, if you are updating the WhatsApp, at the time it should allow you to send a message. So if it is not allowing, that is not worth, right? So if I am updating any of the applications or if I am doing any of the modification to my database, at that time it should not affect on its interface. So that is what implementation can be changed without affecting interface. So for example, if I am sending some messages and in the same way if I am updating that or if I am modifying the content of that WhatsApp, that should not affect on its interface. So we are going to call then that as what? Operation program independence. So if I am doing anything to my data file, that should not affect on the structure of DBMS catalog. That is program data independence, and interface and implementation should be different. So that should not affect on the accessing the content of particular database. This is regarding installation between program and data. So next we'll see about the data abstraction. So you just take the example of WhatsApp again. So we all know how to use WhatsApp, we know how to send emojis, how to send videos, audios, or how to share a file, but do we know how it is working internally? No, right? That is what abstraction. It is not letting the user to know what kind of interface they are using, what are the operation they are performing, how they have implemented. That is none of business to the user. They just wanted to use the software. They just wanted to get the benefit out of that software. In the same way, data abstraction is nothing but it is just only providing essential features by hiding background details. That is what we are going to call it as a data abstraction. You can take the example of washing machine. We all know how to operate it, how to dump cloths and how to pour water, how to put soap or any of the detergent, but do we know how it is working internally, how the spinning operation is working? No, that is what, and I don't require that. If I'm getting benefit out of that particular product or any of the software, then I won't bother about how it has been implemented. That is regarding data abstraction here. So that it allows the program data independence and program operation dependence. So here we are going to call these together as a data abstraction and also conceptual representation of a data. As I told, we know how to use, but we won't bother about how it is working internally. That is regarding what? Data abstraction, and it does not include the details of how data is stored or how operations are implemented. So no need to bother about how data has been stored and how the operation is taking place. Instead of that, I just wanted to I just wanted to think about how to access the data and information which is available in the database. That is regarding data abstraction. And also we have a data model. So before building any of the house or any of the construction needs to be takes place, we are all going to have a one blueprint, right? So that means how my building should look like once it is built. That is data model. So that data model is nothing but that gives you a schematic representation of a database. So this data model comprises of objects and its implementation and relationship between one object to another object in the real world object. So it's not letting us to know how it is having a relationship between one other objects and how it has been implemented. But after that, we are going to get the benefit. That is also comes under this data abstraction. If we have a data abstraction, then we have to follow this conceptualization method. So we are not at all going to bother how it is working internally. Instead of that, we will only focus on the things, how can I get benefit out of that database. That is also one of the characteristics when it comes to the database. So next we'll see the next point, that is support of multiple views of the data. So as we all know that database comprises of n number of users and each user will going to think in a different perspective, isn't it? I want the different perspective of my data to be viewed. That is what this database has to support, the multiple views of the data. For example, you just take the example of what book my show. So being a user, being a viewer, I am going to book the seats. So based on that, the operation will going to takes place. And being in the account section, I will bother about whether they have paid or not. So for me, that perspective of the database will be different than the viewer. And being a database administrator and one who is managing everything, for me, the perspective of that database will be different. So that database has to support different views of a different user. That it will going to be possible when we have this characteristics. So it supports of multiple views of the data. Data can be viewed in a multiple perspective. That is regarding this point. So what do you mean by view then? It is a subset of database. As I told, database is what? Collection of table. And if I take one or more columns from each table, then I am going to create one more table. That is what I will be considering that as a view. It is a subset of a database and it is not what a physical database which is not really exist, but it is in the format of virtual. So that it contains virtual data which is derived from the database files, but it is not explicitly stored. As I told, it is not physically present but is virtual data. So you take the example of you and your shadow. So if I hit your shadow, that will that going to affect on you? No, right? In the same way, if I do any modification to my views, then that will not going to affect on the original database. So that it virtually present, it is not physically present in our database. And also we have a multi-user DBMS. As we all know that if it is a database management system that comprises of n number of database and each database will going to have a n number of tables. So if you have all these facility, then the number of users is also going to be increased. That is of multiple user. Multi-user DBMS in the sense what? In a particular time, all the users should get the benefit out of this DBMS, multi-user DBMS. For example, you consider I have a student table, right? So a student table comprises of student ID, their personal details along with their academic data. For example, one user may be interested in retrieving the marks of all the students and another user might interested in retrieving the personal details of a student. That what this database should allows, or it should give the privilege to the multi-user in order to access the data, those who are interested in particular kind of data what they wanted to retrieve. That is what multi-user DBMS. So that users have variety of distinct application, and each application should be of different perspective for each of the user. So that must provide facilities for defining multiple views. So if I am not bothering about personal details of a student, then that should not bother me at all. So if I am interested only with the marks of a student, that database must be allow me to fetch the details of a student marks only. That is what multi-user DBMS. So view is nothing but it is a subset of a database, and multi-user database, it should allow the multiple perspective or multiple views of a database user. So next we have sharing of data and multi-user transaction processing. Already we know regarding sharing of data. So mainly we are having this database in order to store the data in a large sector, right? That means if it is a file, then that can be accessed by a limited number of people, but it is a database and it is updated to the internet or a network. At that time it can be used by n number of users and can be shared by n number of users. So that sharing of data and multi-user transaction processing. So it must allow multiple users to access the database at the same time. You take the example of your university result. So all are trying to access the same web page. All are trying to get the result. So if it is stored in the database, so at the time it has the ability to allow multiple users to access the database at the same time. All are trying to access the university database which is of the result, right? So everybody is fetching the content of that result at a time. So that will be considered as what? Concurrency control software. For example, if one student is viewing the result of themselves, that should not affect on the result of another student. So every content of a database at the same time should be available to more than one user. That is regarding what? Concurrency control software. And if you take the example of Book My Show, so if two seats are accessed by particular user, the same seat should not be accessed by another user. That is what? It should not affect on the content of one user to the another user. So that will be considered as what? Concurrency control software. So if some of the amount is deducted from your account, that needs to be specified only one time, and another user or another accountant should not deduct the money again. So it has to take place only one time. That is regarding concurrency control software. So it ensures that several users trying to update the same data do so in a controlled manner. Everybody is trying to update the same data, but it has to take place only one time, so that result of the data updation needs to be correct. And also this will going to be supported by this online transaction processing application. So as I told, you can take the example of reservation, you can take the example of booking. At that time, if it is done by one person or one of the database management user, even that same content should not be accessed by another user. So if my seats are booked, then that seat should not be available for any other user, those who are searching or checking for the vacant seat. That is what we are going to call this concurrency control software. So we'll see about this transaction now. So central to many database application. So transaction in the sense what? Whether we are executing, whether we are retrieving the content of a database, whether we are doing some of the updation or selection. That means what? Are we performing any operation with respect to the database? That is considered as what? Transaction here. So that here this transaction comprises of two parts. One is with respect to isolation and another with respect to atomicity. So what do you mean by transaction then? Executing program or process that includes one or more database. I'm executing some of the programs or I'm processing some of the program. So in order to do that execution or processing of that program that may comprises of one or more database. So within one or more database, I'm accessing the content, I'm giving what I'm executing some of the program, I'm processing some of the content. So that may comprises of one or more database. So as I told, it has two parts. One is isolation and another one is atomicity. So when it comes to the isolation property of this transaction, at the time each transaction appears to be executed in isolation from other transaction. So if I doing any of the modification to the same content, that needs to be allowed and that needs to be modified by only one user at a time and should be only one time. That is what isolation. So if I am sending message to my friend in my WhatsApp, that should not affect on the content of another user, one who is using their WhatsApp. Okay, because when I consider one or more database, at the time if I am doing some of the execution to, or if I am doing some of the updation or a process to another combination of database, that should not affect on the content of another database. So even 100 of transaction appearing or taking place at a time, but one transaction should not affect the content of another transaction. That is what isolation property is all about. And also we have a atomicity. What do you mean by atomicity here? It ensures either all the database operation in a transaction are executed or none are executed. So if you take the example of Google Pay, Phone Pay, any of the online transaction, at the time what must be the resultant? Either money needs to be deducted from your account and should be credited to another account, or else so the amount should not be deducted from your account and should not be credited to another account. So the transaction happens to be in a two ways only. It needs to be what? The transaction is executed, or a transactions are executed, or none of the transaction should be executed. So that is regarding what? Atomicity. Should be executed or should not be executed. It should not be in the intermediate phase. That is regarding what? Transaction. So these are the characteristics we have when it comes to the database. We'll see the next one, that is related to actors on the scene and workers behind the scene. Then who will be considered as the actors on the scene? We'll see now. The people whose job involve the day-to-day use of large database, then we are going to call those people as what? Actors on the scene. Those who are all involving, or people, those who are involving in the day-to-day transaction or usage of a large amount of database, then we are going to call those people as actors on the scene. Then who will be considered as actors behind the scene? The people who may called workers behind the scene. They are all the workers behind the scene. They are not directly actively using the database, but they are helping in order to work to maintain the database system environment, but who are not actively interested in the database itself. They are taking care about the maintenance. So they are not bothering about how to use the database and who are all the user, whether I am getting a benefit out of it or not. They won't bother. Then we are going to call those kind of people as what? Workers behind the scene. So now we'll see about this actors on the scene. So if you consider that, first we are going to have a database administrator. Let me tell you in short. Here we have a database administrator. If I consider a database, everything will be considered as a resource. So in order to maintain and manage all those resources, then we require one administration part. That is regarding what? Database administrator. Next we have a database designer. So how my database should look like? What must be the structure of that database? Everything will going to be designed by this database designers. And who is going to get the benefit out of this database? Then they will be called as end users. And also we have types of end user. Let me discuss in the coming slides. And also we have a system analyst and application programmers. And we are going to call them as what? Software engineers. So now you just need to conceptualize, analyze. I wanted to build a database. So in order to build the database, first I require the analyst. Right? So I have to analyze what kind of data I wanted to take, how many tables I must include. That is what database analyst. So what kind of data I wanted to take, who must be the user, what kind of application we are doing, what kind of database we are doing. That is what we need, some analyst. So they have to analyze. Once it is analyzed, then that will going to reach to the designer. based on the analysis of a system analyst, designer will going to design the database. So based on the design, the application programmer will going to write a code for that in order to access the content. Then who is going to access those content? That is by end user. Then all these operations will going to be managed by this database administrator. In short, it is DBA. So these are all the people which will be considered as what? Actors on the scene. And it is important question with respect to your examination. So now we'll see each actors on the scene separately now. So now first we have a database administrator. So as I told, the database administrator will going to take care about the complete resource of a database. Then what are their responsibility? They include authorizing access to the database. So anyway, if you are storing large amount of data, even though that is confidential data, then I can't access unauthorized user. The person, one who is providing a particular ID, that means one who is giving their login ID and then their password, then will be considered as what? Authorized users. So this database administrator will going to take care about providing a authorization, whether they are legal user or not. So if they are genuine user, I have to allow them to access the content of my database. Then only they can access the content. Otherwise, they should not. Then I can ensure providing a security for my database. So that being a database administrator, their responsibility is to authorizing the access to the database, whether they are genuine user or not. So if they are, then I have to provide the credentials in order to access the content of database. Otherwise, should not. And also coordinating and monitoring its use. So after that, what they are doing in my database, I just allowed them to go inside my database and how they are using the resource of my database, whether I am giving a privilege them only to read the content, only to execute the content, or to update, or to select, or to delete the content. That is what they have to coordinate and monitor how they are using the database. That is also the usage of that is also the responsibility of this DBA. Then acquiring software and hardware resources. So when the provision of this resources is reaching to the users, then the resources needs to be utilized in a very good manner. So taking care of that software and hardware resources, whether they are utilizing in a proper manner or not, that is also responsibility of this DBA or database administrator. So this is regarding database administrator. So next we have a database designer. So already I told you regarding designer, right? So once the analyst giving their analysis of a structure of a database, then the designer will going to design. They will going to identify the data to be stored. So they know how the structure is. So then they will think about how to fill the data, what kind of data I wanted to store. That is regarding identifying the data to be stored, and also choosing appropriate structures to represent and store this data. What kind of data type I wanted to use, and which is the best way of representing that data. That will going to be designed by this database designers. So next we have a end users. So as I told earlier, end users are the people, one who is getting benefit out of this. And also we have types of end users here. The people whose jobs require access to the database. They are just accessing the content of a database. Then we are going to call those people as what? End users. So they use the data for queries. I am going to ask the questions for reports, and some of them update the database content. So being a end users, what I can do, I can update the content, I can modify the content, I can generate the reports, or I can use the data for my queries or for my questionnaires. So and also we have 4 types of end users here. One is casual end users, and naive or parametric end user, and we have a sophisticated end users, and also we have a standalone end users. So these are the 4 types of end users that we have. We'll see the first type regarding casual end users. So they're not using the database regularly. So they are coming and they're just using for an occasional purpose. So here end users, which is casual end users, they access the database occasionally when they need it, and make sure that they will come up with a different perspective, or they come up with a different usage each time. So when they are using this database occasionally, each time they will come up with a different properties. They will come up with a different information each time. That is regarding casual end users. So next we have a naive or parametric end users. So here they will be considered as what? Regular users. So naive or parametric users are regular users. So they make up a large section of the end users population. So here they are going to use the database in a regular manner, but they use previously well-defined function in the form of can transaction against the database. They know how to use the database and how to get the benefit out of that. They will be considered as what? Regular users, and they are using it for a particular purpose. So then what are the examples we can take for this naive or parametric end users? So you can take the example of bank tellers. So for a transaction to be stored in a database, they are going to have their own application and they are going to use it on their particular basis. So here you can take the example of bank tellers, that is what regarding ATM and with respect to reservation clerks. So they are going to use the same software, they are going to update the same database on a daily basis or a regular basis. So they know how to use a particular database, that is regarding parametric. Based on some content or based on some of the specific application, they are all using the database. So next we have what? Sophisticated database user. So that is also what? These include business analysts. Then who are all the people which comes under this sophisticated end users? That comprises of business analysts, scientists, engineers and other thoroughly familiar with the system capabilities. So they know perfectly regarding the database, what is the capacity of the database, how the structures has been designed or how the structures has been analyzed. Everything they will know in and out of the database. So they include higher end of the database here. The comprises of business analyst will going to use the business analyst will be considered as a sophisticated user, and scientists, they know what is the purpose of using this database. They are not going to use this in a careless manner. They know how to use it and what is the benefit that I can get out of it. So that includes business analysts, scientists, engineers and other, they know thoroughly, they have a familiar characteristics with the system capabilities, and they are all going to use tools that mainly have a form of software packages that works closely with a stored database. For a particular purpose, they are all using this database. They will be considered as what? Sophisticated end users. And we have a standalone end users. The best example is what? Google Drive. So here they maintain the personal database using ready-to-use packaged applications. So when the database used for their personal use, so when they are using it for a personal benefit, then that kind of user will be considered as standalone. For example, if you consider what Google Drive, so there we are going to manage the files, we are going to manage the records or a data. I'm doing it for my own personal perspective. So I'm doing it for my personal benefit. Then I will be considered as what? Standalone user. So what is the example for this? We have a tax program that mainly that kind of tax program user that create its own internal database in order to manage the tax transaction and all. And also we have a user that maintains an address book. So that is what they are using, these kind of database for their personal use. So these are the types of end users. So we have a casual end users, occasionally they are using, and navy are parametric end users, they are using for a particular purpose, and regularly they are using. And also we have a sophisticated user, they are using for as a higher end users, they know how to use the or what is the capability of a system, and these people comes under this sophisticated user, and the people one who are using the database for their personal use will be considered as a standalone users. So next we have a system analyst and application programmer. As I told, why we require analyst? So they determine the requirements of end user. They will analyze what is the need of a market right now. So if I am giving the need of a market right now, then I will be in the top of a market. That is what here we determine the requirements of a end user. The determination of those requirements of an end user will going to be done by this system analyst. Then what application programmer will going to do? They are just going to code it. So they implement these specification as programs. So that collection of program will be considered as a software. Then that software will be used in order to access the content of a database. So this is regarding system analyst and application programmers. So next we are done with actors on the scene. So now we have workers behind the scene. Who are comprises of, or who will be considered as what? Workers behind the scene. So DBMS system designer and implementers. So we are going to call this designers and implementers as a workers behind the scene. It's like a what? Producer and director of a movie. So they are not going to be seen on a movie, but they have worked in a background. That is what? They have worked behind the screen. So system designer and implementers will be considered as workers behind the scene. What's their work? So they design and implement the DBMS modules and interfaces as a software package, but they can't be seen or they can't be the regular user of a database. And also we have a tool developers. So as I told here I require some tools in order to access the content of a database. So then we have a tool developers. So they design and implement the different tools in order to access the different applications of a database. So that is what one of the behind scene actors here. And we have operators and maintenance personnel. So they are going to maintain, they are going to take care about the operations, what they are taking place in the database. They will not work as a actors on a scene. They are behind the scene and they are working for the progress of a database, but they can't be seen here. So their responsibility for running and maintenance of a database. So what we have? DBMS system designer and implementer, and also we have a tool developers, and then we have a operators and maintenance personnel. Personnel in the sense team. It's like a human resource. So these are the people will be considered as what? Workers behind the scene. I hope you all understood. It's all about my today's session. In my coming session, we will be discussing regarding advantages of using DBMS approach. What are the benefits I can get out of this using the DBMS approach, and then I must know when I should not use this DBMS, when it is not necessary, on what scenario I should not use this DBMS, that I will be discussing in my coming session. I hope you all understood. Let me meet you in the next session. Until that, keep learning, keep on growing. Thank you.